4, 3, 2. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome once again to our weekly public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Vigili, Public Information Officer, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and thank you for joining us. Today with us is Dr. James Bridgers, who is our Acting Health Officer, as well as Dr. Earl Stoddard, who is Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for the county. And we do have a special guest, U.S. Representative Jamie Raskin. Reporters, today, the county executive will do some opening remarks, then the congressman will do opening remarks, and the congressman has a hard stop at 9:30 this morning, which means reporters, you're going to be able to ask questions, but we need to limit one question per member of the media. With that, I toss it to you, Mr. County Executive. Good morning.
Hey, thank you very much. Greetings from Bethesda this morning. I'm joining you from the Bethesda Regional Service Center because in about an hour, we'll be dedicating a new mural commissioned by the Bethesda Arts and Entertainment District. And that'll be over at the intersection of Old Georgetown Road and Woodmont Avenue. And we're going to be back in Bethesda tomorrow for a press conference at 11 a.m. to announce our new 3 blocks redevelopment of parking lots off of Wisconsin Avenue to come with affordable and deeply affordable housing, much needed green space, and replacement parking. I'm honored to be joined this week by Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin. Not only does he represent Maryland's 8th district since 2017, he also calls Montgomery County home. I think most of us are aware of the tremendous work he's doing with the special committee looking into the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The January 6th committee is carefully laying out for us what happened that day and in the days and weeks leading up to that terrible and shocking event. The committee's been brilliant in sketching out for all of us what happened and the work of those who attempted to overturn an election and disrupt the peaceful transition of power, which is the hallmark of a democracy. For the residents of our county and the region, January 6th felt personal. A number of our residents, including Congressman Raskin and several members of his family, were in danger at the Capitol that day. And our police officers were the first non-federal law enforcement to respond and enter the Capitol when help was called for. And they were put in harm's way by the actions of former president and his supporters. Many of our firefighters and paramedics were also dispatched into the city. We're grateful to Congressman Raskin for all of his work to help our communities in other ways. I appreciate all the federal resources that he has advocated for over the last 2 years as we've responded to and recovered from the pandemic, as well as helping secure funding for our transportation infrastructure and our efforts to combat climate change and end homelessness. During COVID, Jamie began recognizing local heroes, highlighting constituents who've been extraordinary in helping others. And I'm pretty sure that we think of him as one of our local heroes around the county here. He's a partner, and Montgomery County is very fortunate to be represented by him. I'll now turn it over to my congressman and my friend, Jamie Raskin, for some brief remarks, and then he'll take some questions from the press before he needs to depart. And then we'll resume the rest of the COVID briefing. So thank you, and it's up to you, Congressman.
Mark, thank you so much for this wonderful invitation, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you. I want to salute you and Dr. Bridgers and Dr. Stoddard and your whole team for the really sensational work you've done through the COVID-19 crisis. We've worked hand in hand, throughout these several years, but I'm so proud to live in Montgomery County, a county which really upheld the public health and stuck to our values and made sure that everybody was taken care of. So I'm grateful to you for that. I imagine those who are still interested were able to see the hearing that we did yesterday, which focused on the time period between the meeting of the electors on December 14th, 2020, when Joe Biden became the president-elect, when Senator McConnell saluted him, and right before January 6th through January 5, and what happened during that time period. And that was a time when the domestic violent extremist groups really assumed central importance in terms of the planning of the attack on the Capitol. And I've described 3 rings of activity that were taking place. And one was this continuing effort at a political coup. There's really no other way to describe it. The political scientists call it a self-coup, when it's not the military against a president, but it's the president against the government because he fears loss in an election. And so he's looking for a way to overcome the election or destroy the election and the constitutional order in order to stay in office. So there was this effort to get Mike Pence to step outside of his constitutional role on January 6th and simply declare that he had the power and then utilize this power to reject electoral college votes. So that was one ring of activity. The second ring of activity consisted of the domestic violent extremist groups, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the militia groups, First Amendment, Praetorian, a bunch of the groups that you may have seen yesterday in our hearing. And they were planning to come and storm the Capitol. And I should say that there were more than 50 Montgomery County police officers. And as you were saying, Mark, a lot of first responders who came and participated and fought bravely and worked to save people and to minister to people who are suffering from wounds, because it was like medieval combat out there for more than 5 hours. And then the final ring of activity was this huge crowd that had been assembled basically over social media by then President Trump, who had sent out a tweet, "Be there, will be wild," that now infamous tweet that was the first time in American history that a president had summoned a mob or a crowd even to block the peaceful transfer of power. And that's the story that we told yesterday. One other quick federal update I'll give you, Mark, and I'm happy to take questions about that, but the House of Representatives back in March passed the Women's Health Protection Act, which is an attempt to codify Roe versus Wade, which is essentially what Maryland has already done in state law, but we voted to do that at the federal level. It has become stuck, as way too much of our legislation has become stuck over on the Senate side because of the filibuster. We're going to pass it again on Friday to try to double down on the pressure on the Senate to act, but also we'll be passing legislation which we hope will have even a greater chance of making it through the political straitjacket over in the Senate, which would protect the right of women to travel interstate in order to obtain health care in the destination state. And I'm introducing this with my colleague Lizzie Fletcher from Texas, but it declares that that constitutional right already exists, and we are going to fortify it and reinforce it with a law that would allow people to sue in the event any state tries to criminalize or penalize or just impede interstate access for the purposes of obtaining healthcare. So that's 4 minutes of stuff, and the floor is open. Mark, I'm happy to talk to the great local press corps you've assembled there.
Okay.
Am I calling on people, or do you call on people, or Lorna, or?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Congressman Raskin. Members of the media, please use the chat to request permission to ask questions to the congressman. Anybody with questions for the congressman?
Lorna, we're trying, but I'm not seeing an everyone choice pop up.
I saw Tom Sherwood signaling his hand. I don't know.
I did. Can you hear me, Congressman?
Yes. His
Good
handsome
morning,
face
Tom.
popped up
Go
on
ahead.
the screens.
All right. Thank you very much. The inflation numbers were out this morning. They remain bad. Put on your political hat, please, and look towards the midterm elections. A lot of the work you're doing now could change substantially if the Republicans take control of the House. And you've already talked about the roadblocks in the Senate. What is your view looking ahead to the midterm elections? What do Democrats have to do to avoid the tsunami that some people say is coming against your party? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tom, for that question. You know, I'm not in the prognostication business. I'm in the mobilization business, so I'm going out all around the country to try to help people in the Democratic caucus hang on to their seats up against an avalanche of gerrymandering, which seems to be allowed where the GOP is in control of the state legislatures, and when the Democrats try to gerrymander back, it gets struck down. What we had a judge in Maryland who said, well, yes, gerrymandering, the Supreme Court is allowed, but not extreme gerrymandering, which made no sense to me. But in any event, look, I hate gerrymandering. I want to get out of that whole business, which is why I support the For the People Act. And unfortunately, that became a partisan blockade too. But what I'll tell you, Tom, is this. I see, I don't buy the whole thing about just, cyclical and, the president's in power, so we've got to lose 30 seats or whatever. I just don't buy it. I don't think that describes politics anymore. I find gerrymandering to be a much more serious problem for us. But I'll tell you this, there are a lot of things going in our favor. One is that this Supreme Court is dragging the country back by decades or centuries in terms of a lot of things. I mean, the decision destroying a woman's right to choose, I think, is going to cause a revolution among younger women, among older women, against anybody who really wants to stand up for freedom in the country. I think we've seen tremendous swings in the polls just over that. I think that the work of the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee is exposing some very serious problems in terms of what's happening to Abraham Lincoln's party under the control of Donald Trump. I think people who care about climate change, which is the overhanging problem of our time, will be alarmed by what the Supreme Court just did in that decision. And the problem of gun violence also continues to be a huge motivator for people across the country, as one party is trying to wrestle with it and deal with it and pass a universal violent criminal background check, and the other party wants to offer nothing more than prayers and hopes. So I guess I would just say I'm feeling that it's going to be competitive, and I'm not with the people who say that everything is lost.
If I could just very briefly with a quick follow-up.
Tom, can we go ahead and move to the next reporters? If we have time for a follow-up from you, we'll get to it, because we have several reporters and we need to give them an opportunity. Okay, Ryan, you're up next, WTOP. Thank you, Tom. We'll get back to you.
Thank you. Quick question for you, Representative Raskin, on the efforts in Montgomery County to come up with a bill on concealed carry, or wear and carry, as it's called in Montgomery, in Maryland. They have introduced a bill that would restrict those permits, that would revoke the exemption 100 yards, within 100 yards of any place where public may assemble. The folks at Maryland Shall Issue say there is no way, given what the Supreme Court has ruled, that that would stand up in a court of law. What's your thought on that?
Well, hello, Kate, Ryan. It's been way too long. It's nice to hear your voice. I know very little about what the legislation is that's being drafted, but those people might have a point. The Supreme Court has just imposed what I think is a ludicrous straitjacket on the ability of jurisdictions to advance public safety when it comes to the whole concealed carry issue. And I think that those ordinances need to be drafted with the utmost care and surgical precision in order to be struck down under this new terrible ruling by the court. So, but I think they may have a point. I mean, obviously I don't agree with them on the policy, but it sounds like something that just said that the way you described it sounded like it might be overly broad. But again, I haven't looked at it specifically, and I'd be happy to take a look at it for any lawyers who want to. I mean, there's no reason for us to be passing ordinances that we know are going to be struck down under draconian and foolish new Supreme Court decisions. We should try to conform to them the best we can while advancing the public safety.
Got it. You said you don't buy this issue of, in presidential cycles and midterms that, the in party is doomed to lose seats. But are you concerned right now about the current turnout at early voting centers that we're seeing?
Hey, you not that second question there. Okay, let's move quickly. Can you answer that, Mr.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I think that we've had a high turnout in terms of people mailing in ballots, but everybody needs to go out and vote. And one problem with the focus on 2024, which is just obsessive with some people in the press is that it's taking people's eyes off of 2022. We're in the middle of an election now. We need people to turn out right now. So thanks for raising that.
Thank you. Next question from Kate Amata, WBAL. Good morning, Kate. Thank you, Kate. Ryan.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for doing this, Representative Raskin. Your closing remarks are queued up on our DVR to show my twins when they get home from camp tonight, even though they're 9. So I obviously the hearing yesterday was for a national audience, but I'm hoping you can speak to your work on the committee from our local Maryland perspective. Can you speak to what we might hear coming up about the Maryland residents, officers, National Guard members who were called in and put at risk, and especially given the fact that yesterday's hearing was the first time we heard that a member of Maryland's congressional delegation, Representative Andy Harris, was at that December 21st White House meeting. What do you make of that? Have you spoken to him since then? I mean, he's your colleague, from the same delegation. And thank you.
Well, Kate, thanks so much for those questions. There were I had colleagues who were basically participating, as far as we can tell, in this idea of trying to convince Vice President Pence to proclaim these magical, unprecedented, extra constitutional powers to say, I'm going to accept electoral college votes from these states, but not those states. I'm going to return those. And I believe that the strategy was to invoke the 12th Amendment's provision, which says if nobody's got a majority in the electoral college, then the contest is kicked immediately, says the Constitution, into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election. Now, why would they want the House of Representatives under Pelosi and the Democrats to be choosing the next president? Well, they understood under the 12th Amendment that we're not voting on the basis of one member, one vote. We're voting on the basis of one state, one vote. And the GOP controlled 27 state delegations. We have 22. Pennsylvania is split 9-9, and so it would be off the table. So even had they lost the vote of the at-large representative from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, which I think they probably would have, although she hasn't told me that, but I suspect she would have voted either for Biden or someone else. Still, they would have had 26 votes in the bag. And so look, that is, to my mind, an attempt to destroy popular control over the election as we have it under the existing electoral college system, which is not perfect. And, my very first bill that I introduced as a Maryland state senator back in 2007 was for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which now, Maryland kicked it off, and now we have more than a dozen states that are part of it. The District of Columbia joined us too, and we're more than halfway there. But unfortunately, we're not close enough. But if we pass the National Popular Vote plan, then all the electors would be cast for whoever wins in the nationwide vote. But we're just not there yet. So we have a real problem with this electoral college, system that we've inherited.
Thank you, Congressman. We have one more question from Bruce Dupuy, Maryland Matter. Bruce, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Congressman.
Hey, Bruce.
Do you think that Congressman Harris's apparent role in the lead up to January 6th puts him at potential peril in terms of his eligibility to be a candidate for office this time? And do you think he should resign based on what is known now?
Thank you, Bruce. Well, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was adopted in the wake of the Civil War during the Reconstruction. The history is fascinating, but basically the House said this section should say anybody who participated in rebellion or insurrection should never be able to vote again. And when it got over to the US Senate, they said, hey, that's way too broad, that you're going to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of people in the South. Let's narrow it down to the very worst hardcore offenders. People who served in public office before the Civil War, it was served in the Union, swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, but then engaged in insurrection or rebellion and participate in the Confederacy. Those people should never be able to serve in public office again at the federal or the state level. And they said they can vote, we'll let them vote. But since they're the most hardcore offenders, we're not going to let them serve in office again. The problem with that provision, Bruce, is it's not self-activating. It's not self-enforcing. In other words, it needs to have some legislative mechanism for it to work. I hope this is something that we will deal with before the end of the service of our committee. Obviously, we only have a few months left, but I hope that we do make a recommendation about how to create a process for people who participated in insurrection or rebellion against the Union. I mean, this is part of the Constitution for a reason. People who swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign or domestic, should not be able to serve after that. And so I don't want to opine on any particular case and figure out who did what. You know why? Because that should be up to the courts. But I do think it's up to Congress to set up a system where that can be defined.
Thank you, Bruce. I see we do not have any more questions. First round for reporters. We can go back to you, Tom. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you very much. Congressman, you just encouraged people to vote. You said there are many issues. I would ask you, have you endorsed in the Montgomery County executive race? If not, will you before Tuesday? And I know it's kind of an awkward setting for that question.
Yeah, it is awkward. Mark didn't tell me that they allow political questions here on the county press conference. But I'll just say about that, Tom. All of my friends have been very patient and very respectful of my time, because I'm literally working something close to 24/7 through the weekends on the January 6th committee. And I've got a lot of friends running in a lot of places, a lot of people I've worked for a long time. And I'm hoping, we thought we were going to be done this Thursday. They just postponed our last hearing to sometime next week. But let me just say, I'll have some other things to say, perhaps, but I trust in the wisdom of the people of Montgomery County and Frederick County and Carroll County, as always.
Well, before Tuesday, you'll have something more to say?
I just don't know, Tom. You're okay. My head is.
I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the question, even though I knew you probably would not answer it in this setting.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Bruce. Kate Ryan, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. So, Congressman, again, in terms of just the general faith in the process that American people may or may not have now, regarding voting and who to trust and who to pay attention to, what are your thoughts on that? What would you tell someone who says, I'm not so sure anymore about the whole process?
Yeah, I understand that, Kate. My dad used to tell us when we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. So when people tell me they're feeling jaded or apathetic or they're feeling cynical, I say, you know what, that's a strategy. And if you read this really interesting book by Christopher Wiley, who worked for Cambridge Analytica, and he wrote it back in 2016. So he saw the whole plan with Bannon and Trump and Vladimir Putin and what Cambridge Analytica did. Said the strategy of infusing the public with pessimistic, dark messages and ethnic and racial and anti-Semitic propaganda was literally part of the plan. And so when I tell people, I understand why you're feeling like that, because we've been bombarded by negative messages. It just doesn't stop, but we've got to reject that. And, democracy is not about perfection, but it's about finding the people who are actually trying to fight for the common good and the public interest every day. And so I think that our people are really good at that. When I ran for Congress, it was the most expensive race. I think it remains the most expensive primary race in US history. And I was outspent 9 or 10 to 1. But we have people who actually educate themselves about the issues, study the candidates. We don't have boss type politics and machine type politics. People here know their politicians, and they know who's in the community and who's serving the community, who's out there working and who's not. And that's what ends up benefiting us in the long run, I think.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Congressman. Congressman, you have about 1 more minute left, and I believe that Kate Amata has a follow-up question. Kate?
Yeah, this is from a Can't Hurt to Try file, Representative Raskin. Can you give us an idea of what to expect, or a hint of anything that might be coming up at the next hearing? And if we may be hearing more about that, our Representative Harris's involvement in that December 21st meeting at the White House?
Thank you, Kate. Well, I can tell you generally, but as I've seen through this last hearing, which, you know, I got to play lead role in, I mean, a lot of this is done in the last few days because there's the volume of information coming to us is so overwhelming that we don't know right up until the last minute what's going to be in there. But that our next hearing is going to focus on the day of January 6th itself. And on those 187 minutes when then President Trump did nothing, essentially. I mean, it was 187 minutes before he finally sent out a tweeted video statement saying, "You're very special, we love you, but go home now," after 3 hours of mayhem and American carnage, as I described it yesterday. So people, that's going to be the focus of it, but it won't be the exclusive focus of it, Kate. And there might be more information to come out about the kinds of stuff that, you know, you're expressing an interest in. And there was an effort by you know, some people to be involved in coup-like activity, and then to get pardons for it later. And so there might be more information about that coming out. I can't get into individual cases or names, but that's something of great interest to the committee. And we are going to pursue very much what we began to elaborate yesterday, which was the question of coordination with domestic violent extremist groups, which is obviously a very foreboding new development.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Congressman. We believe you do need to go. You had a hard stop, but 9:30 is 9:32. Thank you for joining us this morning. And reporters, thank you so much for collaborating.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Thank you, County Executive Elrich, and everybody. I'm very grateful to you for having me.
Thank you.
Yep.
Now, Mr. County Executive, back to you for the COVID-19 public health update. And you do have a hard stop at 10 a.m. as well.
Okay, again, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank the Congressman for being here this morning. I hope that helped illuminate some of the issues that he's wrestling with on Capitol Hill. The news stories this week are focusing on the recent variants that we've actually been monitoring for a few weeks now, and that are causing more concern nationwide. Nearly 3/4 of the nation is at medium or high risk of COVID community transmission. Here in Montgomery County, we saw a slight drop in cases to start the week, down below 200 cases per 100,000 for the first time in several weeks. But then case levels rose again by Tuesday. In Montgomery County, the BA4 and BA5 variants have become dominant. They are highly transmissible. They also seem to elude some of the antibodies produced after infections and after vaccinations, including those caused by previous subvariants of Omicron. In June, we saw more deaths from COVID in Montgomery County than we'd seen since March. What makes these strains so dangerous are their ability to work around antibodies. Basically, the antibodies don't see the virus, and if they can't identify it, they can't attack it. And this is why you're seeing more infections and reinfections. The good news is that the vaccines still moderate the effect of the infections or the intensity of the infections. This week, there are 133 patients in the hospital, and that's more beds in use for COVID patients than there was for any of the other Omicron strains that we saw since January. Globally, other countries like Spain and Australia are weighing options like re-implementing face mask recommendations and mandates, as are major cities here in the United States like New York and Los Angeles. White House announced Monday that President Joe Biden won't be shaking hands with foreign leaders or anyone else while he's in Israel and Saudi Arabia this week. We should also take precautions on how to protect our families and our community. And if you feel sick and think you need a COVID test, seek out a testing center rather than go into a hospital. We have lots of places where you can get a test. Rapid tests are readily available. PCR tests are available. We continue to offer free rapid tests at libraries around the county. When we first started distributing test kits in January, over 300,000 tests were picked up weekly. We're now only giving out about 24,000 per week. Most jurisdictions are not delivering test kits anymore, but we haven't stopped for the last 6 months, and we're going to continue to make these kits available. I encourage our residents to make sure you have tests on hand and available in your homes. And if you do test positive, please let the health department know by reporting your case. This has been written about in a number of publications, but the non-reporting of cases has really made it hard for health departments everywhere to assess what the real degree of community infection is, and how seriously the virus is taking hold. And so it's an easy thing to do. If you take a test and you get a positive, just let the health department know by recording your case there. And information we share about COVID can help keep the community safe. If it's been several months since your booster or last COVID vaccine, consider getting another shot. The effectiveness of these protections wane. We've been saying this for a long time now, and we're learning that these new strains, you can't rely on the antibodies you get by getting sick to prevent you from getting sick again. So we're glad to report Montgomery County leads the state in vaccines given out to infants and toddlers between 6 months and up to 5 years. And since our clinics have been open, we've given out about 6,500 vaccinations to this group. So please keep yourselves up to date on vaccines. There will be new vaccines apparently available in the fall that'll be more specifically targeted to Omicron. But I think, as we know, this virus continues to mutate, and there are more mutations on the horizon. I think after more than 2 years of this, it's pretty clear that this is going to have probably the prevalence of the flu over the long term. Hopefully, at some point, it'll drop in severity to being no worse than a flu, but we're not there yet. I want to say something about the very disappointing actions that were taken by suspected arsonists this weekend at 3 churches in Bethesda. They were targeted by vandals and suspected arsonists. And we're saddened and horrified by these actions, which included extensive damage to holy spaces, headstones, and 2 fires set inside of churches. Any attack on a building or house of worship in Montgomery County is completely unacceptable. My thoughts are with the leaders and congregants of St. Jane de Chantal Catholic Parish and North Bethesda United Methodist Church and Wildwood Baptist Church during this very difficult time. And it's very concerning to these institutions and to the families that they serve. We've reached out to each of the churches along with Catholic Charities to see if they need any assistance from us to help them during this time. I've also been in touch with our fire chief and police chief and have asked them to keep me updated on the progress of investigation, because these types of cases are very difficult to solve. Chief Jones said patrol officers will be on high alert around churches in our area moving forward. And I continue to encourage anyone with information related to this, or anybody else who's thinking about something like this, to please call Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Services arson tip line at 240-777-2263. It doesn't matter where you worship or what political views you hold. Montgomery County is a tolerant and diverse community. And these crimes are unacceptable. They should be unacceptable anywhere. There's no place for this in our society. And we're going to have our disagreements. They need to be nonviolent and they need to be civil. So I hope that if residents know about things, that you provide us with the information we need to help make sure that everybody's safe. This is not who we are, and it's not what we aspire to be. And we can clearly make sure that all of us send that message to the people we know, that we expect more from ourselves than these kind of incidents have indicated. So hopefully we will find the perpetrators and prosecute them. Finally, I want to comment on the Montgomery County Council. for taking the lead to tighten our own public safety laws following the Supreme Court decision last month that will make it easier for gun owners to obtain a permit to carry a loaded weapon. An announcement from Maryland Governor Larry Hogan last week to alter the state's rules for gun permits, a la the Supreme Court decision, is just as troubling. Both of these decisions weaken public safety and jeopardize the safety of all Montgomery County residents and communities. You know, I can't imagine how any of us are going to feel comfortable with people walking around the streets with loaded guns. I don't know what people who support these policies think is going to happen when people get into disagreements and disputes, and the easiest thing to do to settle the dispute becomes reaching for a gun, or deciding that you feel threatened because you know the other person has a gun and you decide you're going to reach for your gun first. This is bad. We have enough crime and enough violence, far more than any community should have to endure. And, you know, we're not the worst place in the country, but it's not good when people feel comfortable walking around with guns. And I just am really concerned about people getting in arguments, people going to bars at night and getting in arguments. This has lots of potential for spinning out of control. And I think we're going to regret this decision. And, you know, I keep going back to the Second Amendment. This has nothing to do with a militia and a well-armed militia ready to protect our communities. This is enabling individuals to basically assert themselves over other people and have the resources to make decisions that will be fatal for other people. And we don't need to go there. And I understand Congressman Raskin's admonition that whatever we do has to fit the test of the law. There is no point in passing something that'll quickly be rejected. And we're happy to work with the council to make sure that whatever gets passed is going to withhold any legal challenges. The county council introduced new legislation that would affirm restriction on guns in areas of public assembly like parks and recreation centers. And these areas where people play, learn, and come together for social gatherings need extra measures of security if more people are going to be walking around with guns. Outlawing guns in areas with lots of people is a smart move. I look forward to working with the council to get this bill done the right way. I'm now going to turn this over to Dr. Bridgers and Earl for their updates. And I do have to depart at 10 a.m., but Dr. Bridgers and Earl will stay on the call for any questions you may have. So
Good morning, all, and thank you again, Mr. County Executive. I have some slides that I will quickly go through. Our county executive has really touched on many other points regarding hospitalization and data and BA4 and BA5, but I always like to provide metrics. Okay. So just quickly looking at the data points here, we talked about the BA4 and BA5 being variants of concerns. So they are the prevalent variants in the nation right now. The national trend is about 82% in Region 3, which is where we are in Maryland and Montgomery County. We're at 76.1%. Mr. Elrich also talked about the national trend. And so we've been doing analysis and trend analysis over the past several months, looking at not only international trends, but national trends. And we know that if something happens in the UK, we're more likely to experience it here in the United States and in the region 2 to 3 weeks down the line. So we've been tracking BA4 and BA5 during that time, and similar to New York and New Jersey and in the Massachusetts area, our numbers continue to slightly uptick as a wavelet. We don't anticipate a significant surge as we may have seen from BA2121, but nevertheless, there are increased cases. And so we see that. We don't anticipate that we will move into a higher category. We typically see a data trend where we have higher data counts the beginning of midweek when we receive data points from the weekend and then drop off during the latter part of the week, and then again pick back up the following weekend. So we're closely monitoring based on our trend analysis and projections, whether or not our hospital bed counts will increase or whether or not our staff beds will increase as well. And so I'm really going to just move through the slides. Our county executive also touched on the deaths. We know that for the hospitalizations, for the case rates, we know that layered preventative measures work. So washing hands, wearing masks, et cetera, in those common spaces where we know folks live outside our household have been public health measures that have been effective. Again, Mr. Elrich touched on our great ability to not only vaccinate 5 to 11-year-olds, but under 5-year-olds as well. Again, we lead the state with 6,497 doses administered, first shots. Just a representation of our clinic schedules. We have clinics using our racial ethnic access equity framework. We have it in areas of the county where we've seen traditionally lower vaccination rates, and we have them in hours or during hours that are more accessible to parents who may work. So again, I'm just moving really fast through the presentation. So I'll stop there. The last point, we've been working with the Maryland Department of Health. We know that the cases of monkeypox cases, MPX have increased over the past couple of weeks. And so we will begin this week administering pre-exposure population to those pre-exposure vaccinations to those at-risk populations, as well as post-exposure vaccinations to those individuals that have been referred to our health department from the Maryland Department of Health. Again, we have a phased approach, and as we move through our phases for our MPX vaccination campaign, we will have broader access to the vaccine. We're working with our community partners to identify those individuals and/or groups who are at greater risk for contracting MPX. And so I'll stop there and turn it over to Dr. Starr, up to any questions that the media may have for me.
Good morning. The only thing I want to highlight, as county executive alluded to, the obviously fire rescue investigators as well as police are coordinating their investigations related to the arsons and vandalism that occurred in the churches over the weekend. If you do have any arson related tips you want to put in, numbers 240-777-2263. That's our arson tip line. So please 240-777-2263. That's all I have. We can proceed to questions. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, reporters, we're going to open it up again for Q&A. Same collaboration for this round in the next 12 minutes or so, since the county executive has a hard stop at 10 a.m. Any questions from members of the media? I do not see anything on the chat quite yet. Any questions for the officials regarding this update?
Hey, Lorna, can I throw out a data point in response to something I think Kate Ryan asked Congressman Raskin?
Go ahead.
So when you, I think it was Kate, it could have been someone else, asked a question about turnout and early voting. And when you look at the data through the first 6 of the 8 days of early voting, turnout is roughly a third, almost exactly a third of what it was 4 years ago in the primaries. However, the point about mail-in ballots that I think the congressman made, just in case the data, which is a little harder to find on the state website, already more mail-in ballots have been received this cycle than were sent in 4 years ago. So while early vote is down, already mail-in votes exceed the number of mail-in votes that were received 4 years ago. And in both primaries, both party primaries, the number of mail-in ballots that have been requested are 10 times more than what were requested 4 years ago. So it's been the huge shift from in-person voting to mail-in voting, where 4 years ago, roughly 5% of the votes were cast by mail-in, And I think this year you will see almost 60% of the votes cast by mail-in balloting. For some data, yesterday was the last day to request a ballot by mail. You can request until tomorrow a ballot by that can be sent via email in a secure email. And then, of course, early voting lasts through Thursday. And then, of course, all the polling places are open next Tuesday. But some interesting data about turnout that people may not have seen about the number of ballots being requested by mail and already returned by mail.
Thank you, Rich. For those of you who do not know him, he is our Chief Administrative Officer. Reporters, any questions for the officials? I don't see any in the chat. Mr. County Executive, do you want to do some closing remarks before we close, since we do not have any questions from members of the media? Please unmute.
So I just want to say very quickly that residents have to be prepared for a long wait for the election results. Governor Hogan vetoed a bill that would have allowed the counting of the mail-in ballots, I guess, as they came in. And because of his vetoing the bill, they will not even begin to process the mail-in ballots until Thursday after the election. And it is a long, drawn-out process. Every ballot has to be open. It has to be attested to by 2 people, 1 from each party. And then the worst part of it is if a person mails in, if a person had asked for a computer ballot and that got mailed to them and they complete that ballot, it has to be hand transferred from what they send in to a ballot that can be read by our machines. And that is going to delay the counting of those ballots even longer. So it's very concerning that we're in this situation. I am worried that, particularly in some of the races, that you may have different winners on election day than the winner ultimately when all the votes are counted. And I think how we can see how that played out in the last election, where people were claiming that, you wait till you find out how many votes you lost by, and then people will stuff the ballots accordingly. This is not the kind of place that we should have gotten ourselves into. And I wish Governor Hogan would reconsider and issue an executive order if it was remotely possible to allow the different boards of elections to begin to count early, if it's not too late to even try to do that, because it is not a stabilizing thing in democracy when you can't get an election result back in a reasonable amount of time. It's just not the way things should be working. And I think it contributes to misgivings that too many people already have. So be prepared for a long wait. There are unlikely to be many, if any, election night victory parties, except for people who are running unopposed. And other than that, this is going to be complicated. So just wanted to kind of pre-warn people about where this is going.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. I do see that Heather Curtis from WMAL has her hand up. Sorry, I did not see you before, Heather. You have questions?
No worries. Thank you, Lorna. I do have some questions. Mr. County Executive, I'm wondering, you said that, you'll work with the county to make sure that whatever gets passed on gun control as related to the bill proposed this week withholds any legal challenges. The congressman did say that the county should work to propose things that, can keep people safe, but would comply with the Supreme Court decision. Are there other things that the county will consider doing?
The county has very limited authority in this area. Many of us have thought about this before. If I could do something, for example, I would ban the sale of these kits that can convert an AR-15 type weapon into a fully automatic weapon. Because I get curious about things, I've looked at a number of websites, and there are people advertising. Not only will they sell you the kit, they will tell you which tools you need to go to and buy from Home Depot so you can convert your AR-15, and a video to go along with it. So it's really concerning because you have bans on automatic weapons, and yet you allow people to buy the pieces that let them assemble an automatic weapon. Just like if you wanted to buy an assembled gun, you'd have to get a permit and a background check and buy it from a licensed gun dealer. But if you buy a kit, you don't have to do any of those things. If we could legislate in those spaces, I would love to, but I don't believe we have the authority to do that.
Thank you. Is that it, Heather?
Sorry about that. Is there anything, County Executive, that the county could do that, as Congressman Raskin said, would conform with the Supreme Court decision, would conform with other federal laws, while also trying to keep residents safe from more gun violence?
Well, that's why we're going to, I think both the council and ourselves are going to, get legal advice to make sure that whatever we craft is legally sound. I haven't had that meeting with attorneys yet, but I know that everybody's concerned that we pass something that is legally sound. So we will do that before, we put our name on something.
Thank you so much. And I just have a quick question of clarification for Mr. Madalino. Were the numbers you were quoting about early voting, were those just for Montgomery County, or were they for the entire state?
Those were just for Montgomery County.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. Any more questions from reporters? Going once? Going twice? Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you again next week. Stay safe. Have a great day.